As I sit here recording this, and as most of you sit there watching this, it's November, which means we are running out of year and I am running out of energy. And that could only mean one thing. It's time for more low effort content in the form of a not actually Trek actually comment response video. That's the kind of video where I barely have to do anything. You have left comments on my recent Trek Actually and Not Actually Trek Actually videos, and now all I'm going to do is pick a few out and say some shit back to you. So let's get started. This first batch of comments is taken from my recent video where I played a classic Star Trek trivia game. And this first one is from an enemy spy. Always remember, anyone who knows less than you is a casual fake fan, and anyone who knows more is a no-life nerd. Absolutely right. See, now we're starting things out on the right foot. I'm glad that we understand each other. The only legitimate and acceptable kind of fan is the kind that is exactly the same as I am in terms of knowledge and interest in the thing we're a fan of. Anything else, anything more or less or outside the lines that I have arbitrarily and subjectively drawn for myself is absolutely unacceptable. This one's from Andrew Besso. Anybody else remember the SNL skit in which William Shatner played himself at a Star Trek convention? Oh yeah, you mean the one where certain people in the Star Trek fan base reacted so badly to being made fun of that they demonstrated to the rest of the world how they take themselves way too seriously and have absolutely no sense of humor about themselves or their Star Trek fandom, and therefore completely deserved to be made fun of in that Saturday Night Live skit, which really was only kind of a gentle poke. It wasn't even like a savage takedown of overly invested nerdy fans. It was just kind of a little poke, like, you guys are kind of nerds, huh? And certain, not everybody, some people had a sense of humor about it, but there were certain people in the Star Trek fan base that were like legitimately mad at William Shatner because of it. How could he do this to us? How could he spit in our face after we supported him for all these years? Like, Jesus. And of course, the ultimate punchline is now those are the only fans that the studio seems to give a fuck about. So I guess the joke's on the rest of us. Darren Hill says, you know what really burns my ass up? A flame about 2 feet high. Try 3 feet, buddy. 3 feet. You think, look at these legs. Look at these legs right here. You see this? You think this is 2 feet? You think it's 2 feet from tippy toes to ass on this body? On this motherfucker right here? I don't think so. Nikki Lane, I have absolutely no idea how much of that was written ahead of time, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Since you say you wouldn't have it any other way, I hesitate to spoil it for you, but none of that was written ahead of time. The whole point of that taking a Star Trek trivia quiz video was to do a Star Trek themed video that I could make and post without having to do any pre-production work on it at all. None of that was written ahead of time. I did absolutely nothing to prepare for it other than pick out a trivia quiz on the Internet Archive that I had never played before. The whole idea of it was to get a quick video out so that I could have time during the week. Instead of writing a new Star Trek video, I could do other things because, see, I have my Stuffy and Friends Turkey Day Mystery Science Theater style riff video to prepare that I want to have ready to release on Thanksgiving Day, so I needed time to work on that. And I'm also doing this thing with The Great Gatsby where I'm recording myself reading chapters of The Great Gatsby that when those are all finished, I'm going to release those as a series. So I needed some extra time in my production schedule, so easy improvised Star Trek video. And hey, Gerald Lancaster, this was hilarious. I like this kind of content from you, but I also just love to see people struggle at games. I completely relate. With me, it's a little different. I enjoy seeing gamers struggle at life. Progressive Rocks, as our champion of those who do not hate canon, we demand Jason plays this game and defeats Steve. All right. No disrespect intended whatsoever to my very best friend in the world. But I will just say this. And I'm sorry to disappoint those of you who are sort of holding him up as your great hope. I would fucking smoke Jason's ass at a Star Trek trivia game. Okay? And I don't say that to brag, and I don't say that to put him down. Those are just facts. Am I saying I'm unbeatable? No. My bravado has been dimmed slightly by my underwhelming performance on that trivia game as recorded in that video. And I'm not saying that I'm the best, obviously. If I came up against, say, Mike Staklasa of Red Letter Media, he could probably handle me in a Star Trek trivia contest with very little problem. But Jason, he's a paper tiger, my friends. He's a paper tiger. Mouse Malone, this has been bugging me since the last episode, but if a salot is like a teddy bear, except that it's huge, alive, and has 6-inch fangs, isn't that just a bear? You know, I honestly, it never even occurred to me until I read your comment. But you're absolutely right. Spock's like, on Vulcan, the teddy bears have 6-inch fangs and are alive. So you're saying Vulcan has bears. That's perfect. And one more from the Star Trek trivia video. This is from Legrat. I didn't know, Steve. No kill I was pretty obvious, bud. Just saying. I told you I did know it. I did know it. I just hit the wrong button. It was a glitch. It was a mental malfunction. Why in hell won't anyone believe me? Now, these next several comments are from my video about Lwaxana Troi. This first one from Stephen Jones. I would love to see Kai Wynn trapped in a shuttlecraft with Lwaxana for 2 months. You really think it would take Kai Wynn 2 months to kill Lwaxana Troi and make it look like an accident? There's one from Relius. My mother was herself a middle-aged woman, very similar to Lwaxana when these episodes aired, and she found the writing for Lwaxana incredibly sexist. Sure, Picard can sleep with younger women, but when Lwaxana goes for Picard, a bald, middle-aged man, it's a big joke. Of course, our hero would never be attracted to a middle-aged woman. Hilarious! Yes, she was written to annoy Picard on purpose, but that's the point. The writers wanted us to laugh at her futile attempts to get with an age-appropriate man. Yeah, I can see how it would be insulting to women of Lwaxana's age watching the show and seeing their only significant recurring representation on the show being her, this oversexed middle-aged woman whose sexuality is treated as a joke and an annoyance and, depending on how you look at it, a threat and a form of harassment. Like, it doesn't seem very complimentary or very sensitive or understanding to actual middle-aged women who might be sexually interested or sexually active. And also the fact that the character is such an obnoxious fucking nightmare of a human being. I can easily see why a middle-aged woman might watch the show and see that character and be terribly offended and horrified. Here's one from Joel Croteau. What always was the biggest wall banger about The Forsaken is when Odo goes to Commander Sisko to say he is being subjected to unwanted sexual advances that are making him uncomfortable and creating a hostile work environment for him, i.e. he is informing his superior that he is being sexually harassed, and Sisko just says, "Hey, why don't you give her a chance?" I agree. I didn't talk about that scene in my video, but that's another part of that episode that I consider kind of icky, and it doesn't reflect very well on Sisko, and it, even more importantly, doesn't reflect very well on the creators of the show, on the writers, etc., who put that scene in there and expected the audience to kind of chuckle at Sisko going, "Oh, come on, Odo, if she's chasing you, why not let her catch you?" It's like, dude, he's bringing you a serious concern, and your response is, "Go get it, man. You can close the deal. Go get her, Odo." You know, it's like how when there are those cases of like a high school teacher having sex with one of the students, and as long as it's a relatively young, attractive female teacher and a male student, there are always those people who are like, "Oh, what a lucky kid. You know, high five, kid. Good job." Instead of recognizing it as an instance of terrible abuse and manipulation. You know, it's like, no, this isn't okay. There's no way that this is okay. You should not be reacting the way you're reacting, but that's how Sisko reacts. Hey, at least that was back in the 90s, and nobody would ever respond that way to a sexual harassment complaint nowadays, right? Here's one from Eddie ZDI. Even in Half a Life, Lwaxana's transactional approach to parenting is so breathtakingly narcissistic that I thought it was a quote from my own mother. Really helps remind me why I haven't spoken to her for over a decade. Lwaxana is a genuine source of trauma flashbacks for those of us who were raised by shitty people. My sympathies on being raised by a person like this, first of all. And second of all, yeah, I agree with you here, just like I agreed with the previous questioner. This is another example of a scene in an episode where I discussed the episode in my video, but I didn't touch on this particular scene. But now that we're talking about it, I'm totally of the same mind as you are. And what we're referring to, for anybody who doesn't remember, is there's an exchange in a scene where it's Timothy and Lwaxana having a conversation, and Timothy is trying to defend the resolution, which is the ritual on his planet where people take their own lives at the age of 60. And he's saying one of the good things about this is that parents don't grow old and infirm and then their children have to take care of them. And Lwaxana's position is, well, we spend our whole lives taking care of them, and now when we get old, it's their turn to take care of us. And Timothy says, quite reasonably, I think, not that I necessarily share his view on, the resolution, but just on this particular idea, he says, no parent should expect to be taken care of by their children. No parent should expect to be paid back for the love and the care they give their children, is how he puts it. And Lwaxana's response is, why the hell not? And that's the transactional thing you're referring to. And boy, is she a shitty person for saying that. I mean, it's one thing to sort of assume that the bonds of family and unconditional love will mean that if you as a parent do reach a stage in your life where you do need care and help, that your children will be there for you. Like, it's one thing to sort of have that expectation within the context of family love and support, but to specifically say, I feel entitled to being cared for by my children, and I view it as repayment for me taking care of them when they were little. That's just ugly and terrible, isn't it? Like, that's just a really, really shitty attitude to have toward parenting. I gave love to you, and now it's your turn to give it back to me. It really sucks. And it's yet another reason that I didn't even mention in my video why Lwaxana sucks as a person. She's a terrible, terrible, terrible person. This next one is from Michael Larkin. Actually, I met a girl once who was very good at helping me find my keys or glasses in a room she had never been in from hundreds of miles away. She was good at diagnosing illnesses without test results or traditional medical training, again from hundreds of miles away. And similar to Lwaxana, she would interrupt my sugar-coated deliveries to cut to the chase and tell me exactly what I was actually thinking. So can we all agree that mind reading is not a real thing? My mind is open. I don't know, man. I've seen Darren Brown do some shit that was way more impressive than anything you described this girl doing in your comment, and I don't think he's actually a mind reader. Maybe in this particular instance, your mind is a little too open. There's one from Ironically Lame. I've always been troubled by Half a Life ever since I saw the original airing. The logic of the resolution is disturbingly solid. Lwaxana's counter-arguments are weak and fall flat. What's 60? My biggest problem with the resolution, as we see it depicted in that episode, is that it seems to be compulsory. And not just compulsory in a kind of informal cultural way, like a peer pressure way. It's just what's expected because it's what the society has grown accustomed to. That in its own way is kind of unappealing to me, that there's this built-in presumption in the culture that you're going to off yourself when you hit 60, whether you want to or not. But it seems to go beyond that on this planet. It seems to be state enforced. Because when Timothy tries to opt out and say, actually, I don't want to do this, I want to live on and continue my work, the government of his planet acts and cuts him off. And not only is he cut off from his scientific research, it's basically stated that he'll be an outcast. He'll be shunned from his planet unless he agrees to go through with the resolution, which eventually he does. But that's the part of it that makes it impossible for me to support. If it was something where that society, for whatever reason, had evolved and grown and reached some consensus that 60 years is a good time to check out, and that's when most people did it, that would be better, at least. I'm still not sure I would be on board with it, but that would be better than a situation where the government will step in. And if you hit 60 and you decide, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to live on. I'm going to continue my life. And then the government steps in and says, oh, yeah, that's a problem. There's one from Gazebo. Actually, Lwaxana can't read Timoson's mind because Kalons are immune to Betazoid telepathy. Okay. The thing is, if I had remembered that while writing that script, then I couldn't have embarked on that filthy little run I go on in that video. So it's a good thing I forgot about that. Now, these next several comments are taken from my video about the possibility that the Starship Voyager could have been brought home in season 5 of that show instead of waiting until the end. This one is from Bry Guy, who says, 30 years since Star Trek Voyager premiered. I was feeling young and energetic this morning. Thanks for that splash of cold reality. Sorry, my friend, but if it makes you feel better, I'm right there with you. We are all vainly bailing water out of the same rapidly sinking boat here. Graham Pointer. If they were brought home in the penultimate episode, then the finale could be Riker and Troi watching a documentary about the Voyager crew. I like that. And they could pause it and we could get the shot of Troi walking around Captain Janeway and studying her and going, she's a lot fucking crazier than I thought she would be. Oh, why am I laughing that hard? It's not that funny. Here's one from Stephen G. Clenard. The truly Voyager thing to do would be to have Voyager reach home in an episode in the middle of season 5 and then just reset to being lost in the Delta Quadrant without explanation at the start of the next episode, with no explanation or acknowledgement. They could do the same in each subsequent season. I love that idea, but there is a challenger for whether or not that would be the most Voyager thing to do, and it comes from Mr. P.J. Hudson, who says, Voyager making it back home, then keeping the crew in the exact same roles and ranks in the Alpha Quadrant with no change at all would be the most Voyager thing ever. So I leave it to those of you watching this comment response video. Share your thoughts in the comments of this video about these comments on a previous video. Which of those do you think would be the most Voyager thing ever? Having them get back to Earth in one episode and then just retconning it and they're still in the Delta Quadrant in the very next episode with no explanation or acknowledgement? Or having them get back home and it sticks and they are back in the Alpha Quadrant for the rest of the series, but they're all in the exact same position and the exact same rank, and nothing on the ship itself has actually changed at all. What's the most Voyager way to handle that, do you think? Here's one from Ms. Cross. Hey, Steve, I would like to let you know how much you have helped me through my mother's passing. She loved anything Star Trek, and she could talk about it for hours. Watching your videos has helped with her passing somehow. When I watch these, I just imagine my mother and I talking, and it helps. It's weird. But thanks. Thank you. My condolences on the death of your mother. I'm very sorry to hear that. I'm glad that Star Trek was something that you and she could share and talk about, and hopefully now for the rest of your life, watching Star Trek and talking about Star Trek with people will be one of those things that reminds you of your mom in a good way. You know, like for me, both of my parents are still alive, but I was also incredibly close to my paternal grandparents, my dad's mom and dad. And actually, I mean, this is their house that I live in right now. I live in what used to be my pap and granny's house. And so I'm surrounded by reminders of both of them on a constant basis, you know. But one of the other things is trains and the railroad. My grandfather, my pap, worked on the railroad for 30 years. And every time I see a train, every time I stop at a railroad crossing and a train is passing and I have to wait, like it's never an inconvenience. I never think, oh, Jesus, the train, come on, come on, I'll look at my actual watch. Come on, I never feel that way because every time I see a train, every time I hear a train's whistle in the distance, which I sometimes hear, from this house because there are train tracks not that far from here. And sometimes a train will go by in the distance and I'll hear the whistle. Every time I think of Pap and it makes me smile and it gives me a warm feeling of remembrance of him. So, yeah, hopefully Star Trek will be that for you and your mom. And I'm sure there will be other things as well, just like there are other things that remind me of my granny and my pap other than just trains. But yeah, I hope that'll be something that will make you think of your mom and will help and will sort of ease the grief and the loss and eventually will turn into something nice and lovely. And I'm very, very humbled that my silly little YouTube channel here can be a tiny, tiny part of that. So thank you very much. Here's one from Kat Robinson, Arkansas. A bit more context, UPN was not available everywhere across the United States. It was absent in many markets, and before the advent of YouTube and streaming services, it was completely unavailable in those markets. There were groups of fans that circulated tapes of the program, just like MST3K, but unlike MST3K, the folks producing Voyager weren't promoting the sharing of said tapes. This is a really excellent point that I did not address in my video, but yes, UPN back then there were some people that didn't even refer to it and the WB as TV networks. They called them weblets because they had so few affiliates compared to NBC and CBS and ABC, and even Fox at that point had built itself up to an equivalent level of those other traditional big three networks. So you're right. UPN was not available all over the country, and there were regions of the United States that just didn't get to see Voyager during most, if not all, of its original 7-year broadcast run because they didn't have a UPN affiliate that they could watch. So with that in mind, a couple of things. First, the small size of the audience in the latter years of the show kind of can be seen in a different context. And then the important thing to keep in mind isn't the actual size of the audience, but the decline over time. That's what you really have to think about. You can't compare the numbers that Voyager was drawing to the numbers that a show on CBS or NBC was drawing because the potential audience was so much smaller. But you can look at the audience Voyager was drawing in season 1 versus the much smaller audience it was drawing in season 6 and 7, and you can make a fair comparison to that. The other thing is, it's even more impressive. And I say this as someone who, again, was not, generally speaking, a fan of the show and was a much bigger fan of Deep Space Nine. But as I mentioned in the video, even at its lowest point in season 7, when Voyager's audience, its regular audience, was as small as it got, it was still usually drawing a bigger audience than Deep Space Nine did when it was on the air. So you could sort of infer from that if UPN did have equivalent coverage to an NBC or a CBS, that Voyager's audience would have blown Deep Space Nine's audience out of the water. Like there would have been way more people watching Voyager than ever watched Deep Space Nine, or perhaps maybe ever even watched TNG, even though again TNG's audience was much larger than Deep Space Nine's. But who knows? So the fact that Voyager was able to draw the audience that it did on such a small and very limited TV network that had a lack of coverage in a lot of the country, just on a pure TV ratings, just on pure brute force, sort of drawing an audience, it's kind of impressive if you take into account all the different factors. And who knows if it had been if UPN had been a larger network. It probably, the decline probably would not have been any different if the show had been the same, but the raw numbers, I think, would have been even more impressive compared to other Star Trek shows. This comment is from Fausta. It always seemed odd to me that Voyager never finished their premise's inspiration, the Odyssey. They return home only to find out it's different, foreign to them. I would have liked to see how, being gone for 7 years, had affected some of their personal relationships, the myriad of feelings that would come from feeling like a stranger in your own home. But then I remembered the show I was watching. Yeah, Voyager's not the show that would have done that, unfortunately. But that is a really interesting angle. And I've never thought about it in that exact way, but that might have had some potential. If Voyager had come home and it wasn't like they remembered it, it was different. Not in the sense that, oh, we're in a parallel universe and somehow we came back to the wrong Alpha Quadrant. Not anything literal like that, but just like you say, they've been away for 7 years or 5 years or however long it would have been, and things are different now. And maybe they're different in really noticeable ways. Maybe they do come back in the aftermath of the Dominion War, but we see that in the aftermath of the Dominion War, things in the Federation are really different than they were during TNG or Deep Space Nine. Maybe some fundamental changes have taken place, and they're not all good. They're not all positive. And the crew of Voyager comes back with this memory of the sort of pre-war Federation and how wonderful it was, and how they can't wait to get back into the warm embrace of Earth and the Federation and Starfleet that they remember. And it's not that anymore. It's different. And yeah, I mean, I don't think that Voyager would have tried to do that. I don't think that the studio or the executives in charge would have allowed the creators of Voyager to do that. I think they, even back then in the late 90s and early 2000s, they were far too protective of the quote unquote integrity of the franchise that they wouldn't have dare attempt to do something that radical by sort of shaking up the established status quo of the Federation like that. But damn, it would have been interesting to see them try. That's a really, really, really good idea. Here's a comment from Wolfman Jack. Twilight Zone option. They never get home, but keep passing the same planets and even passing their own ship, doppelganger-like, going the opposite direction over and over again on an infinite loop, only for, at the last minute, the big reveal, they were dead the whole time. I like it, but can we add an additional twist to the very end where Voyager finally returns to Earth itself, only to discover that there's been a horrific thermonuclear war that has encompassed the entire planet and killed off the whole population, except for Geordi LaForge, who has been wandering blindly through the rubble of a city all these years, unable to see because he dropped and broke his only visor? Here's a comment from Gavin Kellman. All they needed to do for the start of season 5 was to have Tom coming out of the shower and reveal to the audience that season 1 through 4 were all just a dream. This is great. And Tom is the perfect character to do that with because he's been established as a 20th century TV junkie, so he would get the reference. Like, he'd come out of the shower and he'd talk to whichever character he was talking to in the scene, and he'd be like, "Good morning." And then the character would say, "What are we doing here? Were the last 4 years all a dream?" And Tom would pick up on it immediately and go, "Oh my God, like Dallas!" There you go. Now, these next comments are from my video reviewing the recently completed 3rd season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. This one is from Jennifer R. It would have been so much better if they had skipped the Metrons in favor of Ortegas and La'an dealing with the situation in any way. I agree. It would have been better for them to focus on making their show instead of focusing on making someone else's show that was finished almost 60 years ago. You're absolutely right. And it's like wild that I even have to say that. Hey guys, make your show that you're making right now. Don't worry about making someone else's show that's been finished since 1969. Mallory Malkovich says, after season 2, a lot of fans bemoaned that with these short seasons, we didn't get the fun or thought-provoking filler episodes we used to get from Trek in the 90s. But it seems like the producers overcorrected, and season 3 felt like, oops, all filler. As usual, network TV has learned the wrong lesson from their success. Yeah, and the really annoying thing about this, because I don't necessarily disagree with you here, but were there not quote-unquote filler episodes in seasons 1 and 2 of Strange New Worlds. I mean, yeah, it's only 10 episodes. And I don't like the term filler episode. I don't really think most of the episodes that people talk about when they say that, they're not what I would call filler episodes. But seasons 1 and 2 of Strange New Worlds, yes, they're 10 episode seasons. They're short seasons compared to what TNG was doing. But there was always a wacky Spock episode. There were a couple of other kind of lighthearted comedic episodes. They were all standalone individual episodes with their own stories with a beginning and a middle and an end. And yes, there was there were season-long threads and character arcs that kind of tied everything together, but the episodes were all individual stories. And there were always more lighthearted, wacky episodes mixed in with the more serious ones. So like in terms of not having filler episodes, there was no problem to correct for. Like fans that were saying that about Strange New Worlds were just wrong. Like, we're just wrong. You could say that about Picard. You could say that about Discovery because they were more tightly serialized and it was just one story dragged out across 10 or 15 episodes. You could definitely say that about those shows. Where are the filler episodes? I wish there were episodes that were about stuff other than the main story. Absolutely valid thing to say. But for Strange New Worlds, that was never a problem. Here's one from Normative. Oh, yes, I loathed the ending of What is Starfleet? The show sort of requires the answer to be that ultimately Starfleet is a net force for good, so I'm fine with that. But reducing the question and critiques to an expression of adolescent angst was gross. Yes, it was. Tying the whole thing to, oh, Beddo's sad because Starfleet took away his sister. Yeah, that was really, really awful. The suggestion that there's no legitimate basis for questioning Starfleet or the Federation, like that was, again, it's the show stacking the deck in its own favor. And not only does that feel gross, like morally and ethically, it's so boring dramatically. The idea of, oh, well, of course Beto has some personal axe to grind because there's no way anybody could legitimately question the beneficence of Starfleet. Oh, Starfleet's great, right? Like it's so boring and so gutless to do that, to frame the story that way. I do feel like, yeah, they probably were going to have to end up on some note of, well, Starfleet does more good than bad. They didn't even do that, though, really. They just kind of punted the question entirely and said, but we care about each other and we're all friends, so we're the good guys. It's like they didn't even, it's not just that they gave an unsatisfying answer to that question. They really didn't even answer it. They didn't engage with any of the critiques brought up at all. They just dismissed the critiques as you put it, adolescent angst, and then moved right into what is Starfleet? It's all about how much we love each other. Oh, great. Okay, good job. Glad we had this little talk. I think it might have been more dramatically interesting and more compelling if they had found a way to leave the question unresolved in a dramatically satisfying way. And like just put the idea in the viewers' heads that it's possible that Starfleet isn't a net good, that it's possible that the Federation isn't the heroic institution that we've been told it is, that maybe there are dark sides to this. Maybe there are things that are overlooked. Maybe starship captains or Starfleet as a whole does do things that it shouldn't do or that are unjustified. Just leave the tension to linger, you know? There are ways to do that without it feeling incomplete or without it feeling like a cheat. You know, there are ways to do an ending that makes the audience think, you know, or turns the question to the audience. Again, in a dramatically satisfying way, in a way that won't leave you sitting there going, oh, what a ripoff, you know, that will give you something to chew on, as opposed to making it feel like they introduced a potentially very provocative question and then just chucked it out the window to jack themselves off, which unfortunately is what I think that episode ends up doing. Rick Hernandez. Honestly, I hope they don't create Star Trek Year One. It's the most unnecessary and redundant idea I've ever heard from a Star Trek pitch show. Yeah, I'm not excited for that either. I mean, as much as I like Ethan Peck as Spock, as much as I like Celia Gooding as Uhura, as much as I like Paul Wesley as Kirk, I mean, I like all the Strange New Worlds versions of all the legacy characters. I think have all been good. I've liked them all. But yeah, do I want to see another prequel to Star Trek the original series? No, I don't. And they say, well, but there's a window, because like we have a space between when Captain Pike leaves and then Kirk takes over, but that's not right when TOS, like the first episode of Classic Trek isn't Captain Kirk's first day as captain, so we can do like one season where we fill in that gap. Like, please, can we stop filling in gaps? Can we stop filling in gaps? Star Trek was not built. Star Trek did not become this great big franchise that a bunch of us love because all it did was fill in little gaps in its own imaginary history. That's fucking boring. That's boring. And there's only so much of that you can do before you run out of gaps to fill. As a writer, as a creator, as a storyteller, it's not your job to fill in fucking gaps between other people's stories. It's your job to tell new stories. And yes, within Star Trek, you have to tell those stories within a certain framework, but that framework can be pretty broad. There's a lot of different ways to do Star Trek and have it still be Star Trek. And this idea of constantly narrowing our vision to, okay, well, we did Captain Pike's last few years on the Enterprise, and that turned out pretty good. Hey, let's narrow our focus even more, and let's zero in with a fucking microscope on the, year between Captain Kirk taking over the Enterprise and the first episode of Classic Trek. Let's do that. Let's fill in that teensy-weensy little gap. Because it's there and we can. And the studio, I guess, is so fucking terrified of doing anything new, even within an established franchise. That's the most frustrating part for me. That may be the most frustrating part for me. Everybody talks about how difficult it is to get something greenlit that isn't associated with an established intellectual property. And I sympathize with that. To anybody who's a writer or a producer who's trying to sell a show or a movie to a studio and they're hitting a brick wall because it's not attached to a familiar IP, my heart goes out to all those people and I am on their side. And I think that studios should be a lot more adventurous and a lot less risk averse. I am 100% in favor of that, and my sympathies are with those writers. But the really frustrating part is even within an established IP like Star Trek, it seems like studios are risk averse to do new things within that sphere. It's not enough to say, hey, I've got a new Star Trek show. You have to say, hey, I've got a new Star Trek show, and it's nothing but legacy characters, and it's set in the tiny, teensy little continuity gap between the end of our most recent show and the beginning of classic Star Trek. I don't fucking care. I want to see something new. I don't want to see another year of Captain Kirk. As much as I love that version of Kirk, as much as I love that version of Spock and all those characters, I've seen it. When that show's over, I want that show to be over. I want you to do something else. Come up with a new ship and new people. Please. Please. Here's one from Riff 727. Fun bit of trivia for the episode Shuttle to Kenfori. The name of the planet Kenfori is a not-so-subtle nod to the actor Ken Foree, who was one of the leads for George Romero's Dawn of the Dead from 1978. Just a neat little added tidbit for Star Trek's Living Dead tribute episode. I'm glad somebody pointed this out. I was kicking myself that I didn't point it out in my video because the original George Romero Dawn of the Dead is maybe my favorite horror movie ever. One of my favorite movies, period. I love Dawn of the Dead. And Ken Foree is, yes, he is one of the leads in that movie, and he is magnificent and just one of my favorite horror movie heroes. And yes, Ken Foree, the planet where they run into zombies in the Star Trek episode, being named for Ken Foree. That's an obvious tip of the hat, and it's very, very cool. A buddy of mine met Ken Foree at a convention that we were all at many years ago when I was working with a local independent film company. We took a short film that we had made to a regional festival that was part of a horror convention. And Ken Faree was one of the, the guests there. And my buddy was a smoker and went out on the balcony to have a smoke. And Ken Faree walked out and bummed a cigarette off of him. And my buddy, gave him a cigarette and lit it for him. And then my friend like is like a huge horror movie nut. And so he just gave a cigarette to Ken Faree, right? But my buddy, being a very classy guy, said, you know what? You seem like you want to have a moment and be alone, so I'm just going to leave you to it. And Ken Faree said, thank you, brother. And that was it. Here's a comment from Adam Man PL. Steve is the first YouTuber I follow who noticed John Delancey's cameo is not an outright confirmation of Trelane being Q. Sure, it might be implied, but it could as well be just adding to speculation without outright confirmation, and I was confused how everyone else acts like this is a confirmation of anything. Yeah, to me, when I watched that episode where Delancey plays the voice of Trelane's father, I took that as just like a wink, from the show to the audience. Like, hey, look who it is, a wink, And yeah, I guess if you really want to, you can infer that this means there's some connection between Q and Trelane, but the episode does absolutely nothing to explicitly establish that. And I think the reason why so many fans took it that way and said, oh, look, it's canon. Trelane is a Q and Q is his father. See, they finally established it as canon. I think the reason why a lot of fans did that is because there's this really annoying thing that happens now where a lot of people who watch things, especially if it's like a franchise type of thing, if it's like a Star Trek or a Star Wars or a superhero thing, they don't watch it like to watch it and to see what happens and to take it in and then decide whether they like it or not. They watch it like they're grading it. And they're grading it against the answer key that they have imagined in their head that is whatever they think should happen, right? Whatever they have imagined is the right thing that should happen. And they're watching it and sort of comparing it, and they're going, oh, nope, they didn't do that. Oh, they did something else. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. And when they see the voice of the actor who played Q playing the father of Trelane in this episode, that dings a bell in their head, and they're like, oh, look, they confirmed that. Check. Right? Because that's what they're watching for. They're not watching for the story and the characters. They're watching to check things off of their little list. Here's one from Victor SKB. You're pretty on it regarding storytelling, but shouts to the production value. Those Vulcan costumes were rad. All the costumes were great. The Gorn, who have a history of looking sketch, even in this show, looked amazing. The new Kung Fu dance room and science lab also got some mileage from me. Some people work real hard at this, and I love to notice. I agree, and I'm glad you pointed this out. Even though I found the writing of the show and sort of the overall quality of the stories in season 3 to be lacking and to be very underwhelming and unsatisfying, Strange New Worlds continues to be far and away the best looking new Star Trek show, maybe the best looking Star Trek show that's ever been produced. The set design, the cinematography, the costume design, the character designs when they have, alien makeups and things like that. It looks fantastic. It is a great looking show. It's well made. It's well shot. And especially even if you compare it to other recent Star Trek shows, that was something that was that I pissed and moaned about endlessly, especially to poor long-suffering Jason when we were watching Picard together, when we were watching season 3 of Picard and reviewing it together. I would always complain about how shitty that show looked. It looked like it was shot through mud. I mean, everything was dark and fuzzy, and it looked fucking terrible. All 3 seasons of Picard, honestly, look fucking awful. But especially season 3, when it's a lot of interiors and their own starships and everything is dark and it's gray and blue and you can't fucking see anything that's happening. And then I flip over to Strange New Worlds and I'm like, these 2 shows are in the same franchise and they're made at the same time. Why does this show always look great and this show looks like fucking dog shit? Like, what is going on here? So yeah, I mean, shout out to everybody who works on the production side of Strange New Worlds. Even when the writing is completely failing to meet the requirements. The production is nailing it on every episode. It's a great, great, great looking show. This one is from No Spoilers, Please Thanks. If they're going to keep making subpar episodes, make 26 of them. There's no reason to put out 8 or 9 subpar episodes in a 10-episode season. Is that the ratio that we're sticking with, though? 8 subpar episodes and 2 good episodes? Because that's a 4-to-1 ratio in favor of subpar episodes. And if that's the ratio that we can expect, I really don't see why it's better to do 26 episodes versus 10 episodes. I don't go along with this quantity over quality idea that a lot of people seem to just sort of take for granted as the way that it should be done. Like, people often will say, well, the real problem with modern TV, especially with streaming TV, is, well, they don't do as many episodes as they used to. Star Trek used to do 20-something episodes a season. Now they only do 10 or 12 episodes a season. Like, I really, and I know maybe I'm an outlier on this, I'm in the minority on this, I don't give a shit how many episodes they make. I mean, I really don't. If you do 10 episodes and it's 10 good episodes, I'm not going to be like, I wish they'd make more episodes. Like, a good season is a good season. If you decided that for your purposes, based whether it's budget or whether it's just what the studio wanted or whatever, you say, we're going to make 10 episodes and you nail those 10 episodes like Strange New Worlds did in season 1, nothing for me to complain about, man. And these last several comments are taken from my previous comment response video. This one is from Poggle Rebecca. With Trip, they could have had a scene in Picard Season 3 where Deanna and Will go on board the NX-01 for something. Will sees a portrait of Captain Tucker. He stops and goes, wait, I thought he died. And Deanna just kind of chuckles and says, you can't believe everything you see on the holodeck. Don't get me wrong, this would have been really dumb, but I contest it wouldn't have been the dumbest thing in Picard Season 3. Well, we agree on that. It by far would not have been the dumbest thing in Picard Season 3. I like the idea, though. I would underplay it even more. Like, I would not have any of the characters acknowledge it. I would not have had Riker like do it. Maybe the most I would do is maybe have Riker do a little bit of like a subtle double take, but I would not have acknowledged it verbally at all. I would have just let it linger there long enough for the audience to notice it and go, wait a minute, and then move on to something else. Like, I would not have had Deanna say, don't believe everything you see in the holodeck. Like, I think that's too much. I would just leave it sit there, and like at most, have Riker kind of do like a little head fake toward it, like, what? And then move on. But I really, I love the idea as like a little joke and a little, elbow in the ribs to those sorts of fans in the audience that are going to be like, what? I like that kind of thing. Just don't underline it too much. And yeah, wouldn't have even been close to the dumbest thing in Picard Season 3. There's a comment from Faith Grins. This is a long one, but it's worth it. That's what she said. Or he said, or they said. There are all kinds of people who might appreciate a long one, who might think that a long one is worth it, if that happens to be what they're into. Anyway, Faith Grins says, thank you. I was a philosophy major in college, and absolutely no one ever talks about the importance of the subjective experience when these philosophical, existential questions Star Trek sometimes grapples with come up. Yes, in one sense, there isn't a distinction between Thomas and Will, meaning Thomas and Will Riker, the moment after the transporter anomaly happened, besides where they are physically in space. And the reason Thomas becomes Thomas is that he spends years alone on that planet, and Will continued his career in Starfleet. But from Thomas's perspective, the only reason his life went wildly off track is because he lost the quantum coin flip. And he has living proof staring him in the face that someone else won that coin flip. Howard Taylor dives into these kinds of issues in the latter years of Schlock Mercenary, particularly after the Lazarus protocols become a thing and one of the characters has to be completely revived. It's really good. I urge everyone who loves the weird philosophy moments of Star Trek to read it. Well, thank you for the recommendation there. First of all, I've never read it myself, so I will make a note to check it out. Yeah, I wanted to include this comment because you gave me the terminology for what I was trying to say. I felt like in the times when I was addressing the issue of Thomas Riker and Will Riker and why Thomas, has a legitimate reason to feel like he was done dirty by the universe because he lived his life and Will lived his life. And he can look at Will Riker and say, that should have been my life, or that could have been my life. And the quantum coin flip, I was trying to get my point across, and I felt like I was articulating it well enough, but I also felt like I wasn't quite saying exactly what I wanted to say. I wasn't getting the point across as succinctly and as directly as I wanted to. And I was missing that terminology, and you just gave it to me. And so I wanted to thank you so much. The quantum coin flip. That's exactly what I was trying to say. It was a coin flip. Which one of them ended up on the planet, and which one of them ended up on the ship to continue their life in Starfleet, the life they were quote unquote supposed to have? What decided which one of them was down there and which one of them was up there? And that was it. It's a coin flip. They had a 50-50 shot as to which one was which. And Thomas was the one who, from his perspective, lost the coin flip. That's the perfect way to put it. And I was grappling with that and reaching for that, and I just couldn't get it. So you got it. Thank you so much, philosophy major, for giving that to me, because it crystallizes the whole thing that I was trying to say. Here's one from Ningbeck. The usual prepared speech move is to throw it away last second and speak off the cuff using what happens in the episode as a foil. This referring to the fact that in the last episode of Enterprise, we don't actually see Archer's big speech to the assembly. We sort of, pull back before he actually gives the speech. And my argument was, well, that was the right thing to do, because characters giving speeches in the show within the context of they're actually delivering a speech is just boring. It's not dramatically interesting. And yes, you're right. The way when writers do show the character giving the speech, that is the go-to move. They throw away the prepared speech and they speak from the heart. And it's informed by whatever we just watched in the episode. And again, that it's not realistic, but it's much more dramatically satisfying. And yeah, they could have done that. I'm kind of glad they didn't do that either, because I worry that they wouldn't have been able to resist the temptation to put a bunch of fucking Star Trek shit into Archer's speech. They would have found a way to have him say, space the final frontier. They would have found a way to have him say, we have to continue to seek out new life and new civilizations. Like, they would have put a bunch of cliched Star Trek shit in there, which they've done before. I think they did it in the second Kelvin timeline movie, Into Darkness, which I am a lonely defender of, by the way. I mostly really like that movie, despite all the shit that's wrong with it. But they put those words in Captain Kirk's mouth when he's delivering a speech at the end of that movie. And I think they justify it there by having him say, let us remember the words of the Starfleet Oath. And so now now the opening voiceover from the TV show is the Starfleet Oath. So he can say, space, the final frontier. These are it's like, come on, dude. Like, we know that's not what it is. Like, it's just a voiceover they wrote for the character to say during the credits. You don't need to work it in. It's fine. Don't do that. But I fear if they had gone that way with Archer's speech, that they would not have been able to resist it. And he would have been saying some shit about boldly going where none have gone before, like they did with Zefram Cochrane. We're going to build a new engine, and this engine will allow us to go boldly where none have gone before. Shut the fuck up. Stop it. And here's one from Alan Ollie, who says, I think Steve should have ended with his discussion of the baseball as a burrito, because that's a wrap. That's nice. That's really nicely done. I like that a lot. I'm going to do one more. This one's from Cap 1984-62. A baseball is not a sandwich. It's a leather and cork dumpling. Tortas are sandwiches. Burritos are wraps. Wraps are not sandwiches because they use one continuous slice of bread, not two distinct slices or pieces. So does that mean that whenever I make a peanut butter sandwich, but I only make a half of one, so I just use one piece of bread and I put the peanut butter on half the bread and then fold it, that's not actually a peanut butter sandwich? That's what? Like a peanut butter taco? Is that what it is? Or is it just that I'm making a peanut butter sandwich, but the quality suffers because I half-assed it? Kind of like this. Anyway, that was the last comment. That was the last comment response as well from me. Thank you all so much for leaving comments, for asking questions, for interacting, for watching this stuff. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. I will be back very soon with an actual Trek Actually video, and hopefully you'll watch that and leave some comments on it and on future videos as well. And we can do this again in about 2 months or so, which seems to be the pattern I've fallen into with these comment response videos. I appreciate you all. If you want to support this stuff I do on YouTube, whatever it is, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives. You can become a channel member by clicking the join button. I could not do this without my patrons and members, so an extra special thank you to all of you who have chosen to do that. You can also give a one-time donation instead of a recurring monthly donation by going to PayPal or Venmo, and those links are in the video description as well. And yeah, I think that'll do it. Happy holidays, everybody, for those of you who are about to celebrate some holidays like those of us here in the United States. And I'll see you next time. Take care.